At the end of June 2010, Donna and Samuel Echard faced an agonizing ordeal when their 19-year-old son, Shawn, went missing. The disappearance followed a heated argument with his older brother, Stanley, prompting Shawn to leave the house, slamming the door behind him. Shawn had never previously vanished without informing his mother or taking his phone, making his absence especially alarming. Late that night, the Echard family was gripped by fear over the young man's unexplained disappearance. The official search began 24 hours later, with missing person notices displaying photos of the smiling, blonde-haired Shawn plastered across supermarkets, train stations, and street corners. Yet, despite 2 days of tireless searching, there were no leads. The police were at a loss as they continued their investigation, and for over 48 hours, Shawn Paul Echard remained officially missing. In response, family members, friends, and acquaintances banded together to form a search team. They combed through local establishments, questioned passersby, and meticulously reconstructed Shawn's last known movements. Meanwhile, police intensified their investigation by delving into the Echard family's dynamics, trying to piece together the events leading to Shawn's disappearance. Donna and Samuel, who had 6 adult children from prior marriages, had found solace and stability in their union after overcoming challenges in earlier relationships. They had settled in San Diego, California, creating a blended family before this devastating crisis unfolded. They rented a large, good-sized family home and attended the local church on weekends without fail. The family was devout and lived a quiet and unsociable lifestyle. A few years after the family moved in, they had a son, Stanley, and 2 years later, a second son, Shawn. Donna devoted herself fully to the home and raising her sons, so the brothers grew up in love and care. They both attended a good local school, and on weekends, without fail, the whole family participated in church activities. The eldest children, having reached adulthood, flew away from their parents' nest all over the continent to start their own families. But the Echard family was friendly. They kept in touch with each other, regularly called each other, and spent all family holidays together. Shawn was a simple and fun-loving boy. He had a bright appearance, charisma, and insight that attracted people to him like a magnet. He knew how to listen and empathize, so he made friends very easily. Stanley, on the contrary, had a more reserved character and was wary of everything new. He was shy, so socializing with people was much more difficult for him than for his brother. They had one common group of friends and classmates despite the age difference. Together, the brothers were like one, helping each other and always looking out for each other. The boys grew up well-mannered and studied very well. They always had a trusting and friendly relationship with each other. Small jokes about each other were accepted with humor by their parents. Respect was valued above all else in the family. Donna and Samuel raised their children from childhood with faith in God and according to God's laws. The life of the Echard family flowed in its own way. As the brothers grew up, their interests unnoticeably became completely opposite. The youngest, Shawn, played in the music band, and the eldest, Stanley, became interested in martial arts. The life of each young boy was filled with vivid impressions and emotions, which they shared with the family in the evenings. Shawn was always first. His stories about music, friends, and upcoming plans took up most of the evening time. When the family gathered before dinner and shared the emotions of the day, everyone listened to Shawn. There was no time for Stanley, nor, it seemed to him, was there much to share. No grandiose plans for the future, no exciting stories, not even stories of friends to draw attention to. So Stanley humbly listened to his brother's stories. On one such evening, Shawn told his family that he had met a neighbor girl, Mary Jane. A fragile young girl with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair put Shawn in a daze. Through the open window of the house where the girl lived, he heard a magical piano playing. As if mesmerized, he went to the captivating sounds of music and entered the house without knocking. Self-confidence in his own charm allowed Shawn to get out of such a funny situation with dignity and cleverly met the girl he liked. She was a few years older than Shawn, but this did not prevent them from maintaining a friendly relationship. The soul of the company, Shawn often organized picnics where Mary Jane was invited. They walked a lot, visited parks and observation decks. The budding adolescent love affair was interrupted by the unfair reality of the adult world. The Echard family received the sad news of the illness of Donna's elderly mother, Shawn, and Stanley's grandmother. In search of prosperity, parents tried to take into account the interests of each member of the family, but the decision made fundamentally changes the life of the whole family. Shawn did not want to leave his native land, his friends, and his Mary Jane, but the parents' decision had already been made. The Echards leave the city where their children were born and raised and move to another state. So in 2005, as fate would have it, the Echard family settles in the house of Donna's mother in the small town of Spring Hill in Florida, where they begin a new life. The move was like a breath of fresh air for the whole family because the decision was the right one. Shawn and Stanley's grandmother was on the mend. Shawn's heart was broken. He missed his band in which he played, his walks with Mary Jane, and hangouts in his favorite city. But it is impossible for life-loving Shawn to be sad for long, and after a while, a new life becomes as full as the one he missed. Donna and Samuel safely got a job at the Presbyterian church where they were almost all their time. Donna took care of the children in the nursery, and Samuel helped with the chapel. Over the course of time, the brothers grow close again and make new acquaintances together again at school. Old life seems to be resurrected in a new place. Shawn plays in the school band again. Stanley attends a martial arts school that is only a couple blocks from their new home. Despite this new busy life, Shawn can't stop thinking about Mary Jane. Every night after class, he locks himself in his room and they talk on the phone for hours. The goodbyes are in the same way, with Shawn saying he dreams of meeting again. Each time he promises that after getting his parents' permission, he will definitely come to see her. Whereas the younger brother grew and kept his first love in his heart, the elder Stanley tried to establish himself in the family in his own way. Quiet and calm Stanley, by virtue of his stiffness and modesty, seemed to be deprived of parental warmth and attention. In pursuit of self-expression, he makes a series of bad decisions that will have dire consequences for the entire family. In May 2006, he informs his parents that he intends to drop out of school and devote his life to studying martial arts and creating a martial arts club. But youthful maximalism leads the guy into a bad company where he begins to engage in petty fraud and try illegal drugs. In 2007, dysfunctional connections eventually led Stanley to arrest. He was caught stealing and charged with felony fraud-related offenses. The news of the elder son's shenanigans deals the first heavy blow to Donna. She ends up in the hospital with a heart attack, but the situation is quickly resolved with the help of a lawyer hired by Jennifer's sister. He skillfully defends Stanley, proving the lack of direct evidence, which allows the guy to quickly go free, receiving only a suspended sentence. This episode greatly frightens Stanley. He feels guilty and closes himself off in the hope of being understood and accepted by his family. Having survived the frightening events that happened to Stanley, Shawn does not say anything to his parents about his decisions. During his summer vacation, he takes a job as a waiter. Having saved up some money, he leaves only a note for his mother to go to California to Mary Jane. The long 2-day bus ride to his beloved seemed like an eternity. The scenery changed outside the window. The day changed tonight, and Shawn imagined how at the final station he would see her, his Mary Jane. The driver announced the final stop and the bus stopped. Shawn was ready to run to her, for he had already seen her happy face through the window and her long hair, which she was tucking behind her ears with her fingers. They had spent some of their happiest days together. They'd had picnics just like they'd had in his best high school days. Shawn had confessed his love to Mary for the first time, and it was mutual. After another walk, the young people sat down on a bench. Shawn felt faint. His eyes went black. He fell unconscious. Shawn ended up in the hospital. The young boy was fading away like a match in a matter of days. Mary Jane contacted Shawn's sister. Jennifer urgently flew to California. Doctors diagnosed the cause of such a rapid fading of a strong and sturdy guy. Tick-borne encephalitis begins suddenly and very quickly causes complications of various kinds up to inflammation of the brain. A difficult struggle for Shawn's life and health began. Doctors fought for the boy's life for a long time. More than a month of coma and 6 months of rehabilitation helped him to return from the other side of the world. Shawn had a very hard time recovering for a long time. An ordinary tick bite on a summer walk turned out to be a serious injury for him. Jennifer took her brother back to Florida, where he faced therapy and a long recovery. Mary Jane was left to wait. Again, the only source of communication for the lovers was the telephone. A series of troubles and unexpected illnesses brought the Echard family together. Donna does everything impossible to completely rid her beloved son, Shawn, from the consequences of a serious illness. She carefully monitors his diet and exercise. Such attentive care leads to a full recovery of Shawn and to Stanley's inner resentment and jealousy, which he nurtures in bits and pieces. After a while, Shawn regained his strength and returned to his studies in music. In 2009, he finishes his studies and dreams of going to his Mary Jane to return together and introduce her to his parents as his favorite. But Shawn's plans are not destined to come true. Stanley introduces his brother to his dream girl, Samantha Rowe. Samantha, a native of Florida, quickly found a common language with the two brothers. Stanley was in love and sympathized with her, but the girl was impressed by the cheerful and sociable Shawn. For some time, Stanley actively courts Samantha, and she accepts his signs of attention. Several romantic meetings end with a passionate kiss. Stanley is immensely happy, but Samantha, who said yes to her older brother, is still thinking about her younger brother. Samantha decides to write a message to Shawn in which she confesses her sympathy for him and invites him for a walk around the city. The guy agrees, and they spend the evening walking along the waterfront and talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. Shawn does not seek to win the girl after all. He has long belonged to another. A rejected Samantha writes a message to Stanley and tells him that Shawn has been seeing her and confesses that he really likes her too. Stanley was furious. That same evening, he went up to his brother's room where they had a conversation. At first, the brothers talked quietly. Then their words turned into shouts, and then there was dead silence. The parents were at home, but the brothers sometimes clarified relations quite loudly, so they did not see anything special in what had happened. Mom was the first to realize Shawn was missing. He hadn't returned her calls. Recalling the evening before, she got Stanley's explanation that Shawn had left home after an argument. After 2 days of searching, the police received a frightening call. The caller was Shawn's sister, Jennifer. The dispatcher who took the call heard only a woman scream in the receiver. A piercing male moan could be heard in the background. After repeated requests to calm down, the dispatcher finally records the request for help. Jennifer continues to scream. She pleads for help and reports, "Oh, damn it. My brother Stanley killed Shawn. He's in the house talking to his mother. His father is freaking lying over his dead son who's been buried in the ground since early Saturday morning. Damn it. I'm begging for help." Police officers arriving at the scene of the tragedy observed a horrifying scene. In the backyard of the house, Samuel was kneeling on his knees, 2 hands dripping earth. He was pulling his son's body out of the damp earth, screaming and trying to wipe the earth off Shawn. In an instant, a quiet neighborhood filled with sculpted lawns, where the 2 young brothers often waved to neighbors, turned into the scene of a violent tragedy. And now the Echard family, who once raised 2 sons, are left with the horrifying memory of digging in the ground only to find one of their sons and watching the other son being handcuffed and taken away. Stanley Echard was detained on suspicion of premeditated murder. At his first interrogation, he revealed that he had no intention of killing his brother. In a moment of anger, he struck Shawn on the head. The resulting injury caused Shawn to fall. Stanley checked his pulse. Realizing that his younger brother was dead, he tied up the body and carried it out the window to bury it on the lawn behind the house. Stanley's words at the inquest, "I buried him. After all, that's what you do with dead people." These words sound like the cold-blooded calculation of a serial killer, not a loving brother. In his defense, Stanley Echard said he did it for his mother. He wanted to protect her from the shock she might have received at the news. Afterward, Stanley planned to move his brother's body to rebury it once his parents were gone. Stanley's behavior during the interrogation varied. He cried and confessed what he had done and was obviously sorry, presenting it as an accident, or he blamed Shawn with hatred in his eyes. Stanley spoke very harshly and unpleasantly about his younger brother. He called him guilty for all his troubles and admitted that he had won the rivalry for his mother's and Samantha's love. That same day, Stanley was charged with second-degree murder and taken into custody without bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolfe performed an autopsy on Shawn's body. She presented to the court the results of the forensic examination, which indicated that the victim's neck showed bruising under the skin and rope marks were present, indicating that the neck had been compressed to make breathing difficult. The examination concluded that the death was the result of an inflicted head injury and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete Magrino proceeded to scrutinize the case. On February 25, 2011, the first hearing began, presided over by District Judge Stephen Rushing. On the second row were Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Echard. They wept as they watched their oldest son being led into the courtroom under escort. On April 9, 2013, the trial began in Hernando Court, presided over by District Judge Anthony Tatey. The defense was led by attorney Alan Hunter, while prosecutor Pete remained on the prosecution side. The main goal of the prosecution was to convince the jury that Stanley had carefully planned the crime. Defense attorney Alan stated that there was a spontaneous fight that led to the tragic outcome. In closing, Alan appealed to the jury to take note of Stanley's attempt to cover up the crime in the name of good intentions. Stanley Echard was charged with first-degree premeditated murder and faced a mandatory life sentence if convicted of that charge. Sentencing was scheduled for May 13th. Stanley's fate was in the hands of District Judge Anthony Tappy, who presided over the 5-day trial. Second-degree murder is punishable by up to life in prison. Stanley Elias Echard always said he never intended to kill his brother 3 years ago before burying him in the front yard of the house. Before trial, Echard rejected an offer from prosecutors to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for limiting his prison sentence to 20 years. Echard remained stone-faced as the clerk read the verdict. The brothers' parents, Samuel and Donna, wept quietly. As the jury left the courtroom, Samuel Echard's sobs turned to screams, and numerous relatives gathered around Donna and Samuel. The jury agreed that Echard did not plan to kill 19-year-old Shawn, but the jury did not completely absolve him of guilt. After deliberating for about 2.5 hours, 9 women and 3 men found Echard guilty of second-degree murder. All the while, the Echards said they believed Stanley's account of what happened in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010 and criticized the state attorney's office for filing the charges. Later Friday, Samuel Echard said Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter did an excellent job. The family questioned the appropriateness of the sentence. They filed an appeal to appeal the verdict, but were denied. I really can't understand how the jury reached a verdict of second-degree murder in about 2 hours, Samuel Echard said. Despite that, our faith was not shaken, he said. One fact was not disputed during the trial. After his brother's death, Stanley pulled his body out of Shawn's bedroom window and buried it in a shallow grave in the backyard of the family's Spring Hill home. Samuel Echard found Shawn's body 2 days later. Assistant State's Attorney Pete Magrino began his closing arguments at trial by showing jurors photos of Shawn's dirt-covered body lying in a fetal position in the hole. This is not a detective novel case, Magrino said. He noted that Stanley, when questioned by detectives on the day his brother's body was found, changed his testimony as many as 6 times, saying he initially knew nothing about Shawn's death. For 2 days after his brother's funeral, according to Magrino, Stanley sent messages from Shawn's cell phone to family members saying that Shawn had allegedly gone to California to stay with his girlfriend, Mary Jane. Also on behalf of Shawn, he corresponded with Samantha saying that he did not want to communicate and she should pay attention to Stanley. After hours of questioning, Stanley said that Shawn had died during a struggle in the bedroom that morning. He claimed he heard a snap in his brother's neck as they fell to the floor. He then hid Shawn's body to protect his mother, Donna, who has a weak heart. He said he planned to tell his father after his mother left on a trip. Those injuries that the defendant inflicted with his hands constitute murder, Magrino said, and he also called attention to testimony and Stanley's statements to detectives about rising tensions over Samantha Rowe. He also called attention to testimony about a conversation Stanley had with his brother and a friend about revenge in the weeks before Shawn's death. In that conversation, the friend testified Stanley said that if he was going to kill someone, he would hit the person in the back of the head and bury the body in the yard. That evidence was tenuous at best and could not dispel reasonable doubt, Alan Lanter told the jury. A crime involves an act with an intended result, Lanter said. Yes, he was involved in his brother's death, but he didn't kill his brother. Lanter pointed to testimony from a forensic pathologist who said the blow to the head, combined with other factors, Shawn's high blood alcohol content and possible lingering brain swelling due to encephalitis, likely led to his death. The pathologist also testified that hitting his head on the bedroom nightstand when the two men fell could have been enough to kill Shawn. Lanter reminded the jury of the testimony of Donna Echard, who said that Shawn suffered from severe mood swings after suffering from encephalitis. At one point in her testimony, Donna Echard called Shawn's death an accident. The jury also could have found Stanley Echard guilty of third-degree murder or manslaughter. Calling the case a pardonable homicide, Lanter asked jurors not to let gruesome photos of Shawn's body and Stanley's poor decision to bury him in the yard distract them from what led to his death. Stanley Echard did something horrible after Shawn died, said Lanter, but he's not a murderer. During the final sentencing, excitement gripped the Echard parents. Judge Anthony imposed a sentence of 50 years in prison without parole. The parents were broken. One miserable day had taken two sons from them at once. The cold-blooded murder of an innocent man and even a brother is clearly beyond the bounds of adequate human response. In the biblical story, the brother-killer Cain was banished from paradise as punishment. But he solved the problem differently, eliminating the source of his remorse. The case of Shannon Christian and Christopher-Newsome is a devastating story that highlights the dire consequences of hesitation in critical moments. It is often said that hesitation can lead to death, and in this instance, that adage tragically became a reality. The delay by police officers, who adhered to protocol and waited 24 hours after the missing persons report was filed, proved fatal. During these crucial hours, the young couple endured unimaginable cruelty and met a tragic end. This case, involving Shannon Christian and Christopher-Newsome, stands as one of the most notorious and brutal crimes in U.S. history. It shocked the nation not once but twice, first in 2007 when the gruesome crimes occurred, and later in 2011, when the sentences of the perpetrators were challenged and appealed. The prolonged legal battle surrounding the case led to the enactment of two significant laws. One that prevents attorneys and defendants from portraying victims in a negative light, and another that eliminates the requirement for a judge to approve a jury's unanimous verdict. This horrifying tale involves two innocent victims and 5 ruthless criminals, with robbery cited as the motive for the heinous acts. It is a story that demands close examination, not only of the sequence of events and the roles of those involved, but also of whether these young lives could have been saved. Who were Shannon Christian and Christopher-Newsome? Christopher-Newsome, known as Chris, was born on September 21, 1983, in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Mary and Hugh Newsome. He grew up in a loving and close-knit family as the youngest child, cherished and adored by all who knew him. Chris was athletic in his youth, particularly excelling in baseball during his school years. His coach believed he had a bright future in the sport, but a severe injury and a prolonged recovery process ended his promising athletic career. Nevertheless, Chris was a man of many talents. He was an excellent artist, played guitar, had woodworking skills, and was knowledgeable about cars and motorcycles. Dreaming of becoming a mechanic in his youth, Chris' passion for carpentry eventually took precedence. After high school, he attended the prestigious University of Tennessee, where he was a diligent student and ranked among the top of his class. Shamondale Christian was born on April 29, 1985 in the Cogdokes, Texas, the younger of 2 children to Dina and Gary Christian. She was raised alongside her older brother, Chase, with whom she shared a close and affectionate bond. Notably, Dina had been diagnosed with infertility in her youth, and the birth of her 2 children was considered nothing short of miraculous. In 1997, the Christian family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the children attended local schools, and the parents established a small but profitable family business. Dina conducted individual psychotherapy sessions at home. Shannon, sharing her mother's interest in psychology, was outgoing and kind-hearted. After high school, she pursued a degree in sociology at the University of Tennessee and worked part-time to save for her dream of buying a car. Her parents and brother helped her realize this dream on her 21st birthday, contributing towards the purchase of a silver Toyota 4Runner. It was on the university campus in 2006 that Christopher and Shannon met through mutual friends. She was just 21, and he was about to turn 23. It was love at first sight, and the couple became inseparable. Within a month, Chris introduced Shannon to his parents, expressing his desire to spend his future with her. Shannon reciprocated by introducing Chris to her family, who warmly welcomed him. In October 2006, a significant family dinner was held attended by both their parents and siblings. Discussions revolved around the young couple's deep feelings and their plans to marry after graduating from university. Everyone was happy and full of hope for the future, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that would soon befall their families. Vanished on the way to a party. On January 6, 2007, Shannon, Christian, and Christopher-Newsome were invited to a birthday party of a mutual friend. That Saturday, Shannon visited a beauty salon to prepare for the celebration, parking her car in a nearby underground garage where they planned to meet. However, Chris was delayed, leading to a slight argument between them as they were running late for the event. Their friends became increasingly worried when Shannon and Chris did not show up at the party. Known for their responsibility, it was unlike them to miss an event without notifying anyone. Attempts to reach them on their phones were unsuccessful. In desperation, Shannon's best friend repeatedly called her mother late into the night to check if everything was all right but received no answer. The next morning, Dina, Shaman's mother, realized that her daughter had not come home. Initially, she was not overly concerned, assuming Shannon might have stayed over at Chris's place after the party. Besides, Shannon had a work shift on Sunday, so it was plausible she went straight to work from Chris's place. However, Dina's concern grew when she noticed several missed calls from an unknown number around midnight. Returning the call, she heard Shannon's friend's voice, informing her that Shannon and Chris had not shown up at the birthday party and were unreachable. This instilled fear in Dina, sensing that something terrible might have happened to her daughter and her boyfriend. Neither Shannon nor Chris was answering their phones, and Chris's parents were equally surprised, believing he was staying at Shannon's place. Further anxiety arose when it was discovered Shannon had not shown up for work either. The worried parents immediately contacted the police, but the response was lackluster. The officers suggested the couple might have simply sought some alone time and lost track of it. They also followed the protocol that an adult is considered missing only after 24 hours without contact. But for Shannon and Chris, those 24 hours were critical. Not willing to wait, the parents and friends of the young couple began their own search. They contacted everyone they knew, visited hospitals, distributed flyers with their photos, and set up social media groups appealing for any information about the missing students. Despite their efforts, no useful information surfaced. The last known sighting of Shannon was at the beauty salon she visited on Saturday. According to the hairstylist who attended her, Shannon only talked about the upcoming party and had no plans to stop anywhere else on the way, a gruesome discovery along the railroad tracks. It wasn't until Monday, January 8th, that the police finally began their search for the missing young couple, Shannon Christian and Christopher-Newsome. By this time, thanks to the efforts of their parents and friends, almost the entire city was aware of their disappearance. The day before, on Sunday, there were rumors about a horrifying discovery near the railroad tracks, but no concrete information was available. A railroad worker inspecting the tracks in his assigned area stumbled upon what appeared to be severely damaged human remains on the embankment alongside the tracks. The body was in a horrific state with multiple injuries and had been doused with a flammable liquid in an attempt to burn it. The police, responding to the scene, cordoned off the area and conducted a thorough examination. However, they were unable to find any significant clues or leads. After taking necessary photographs, the remains were sent to the morgue for an autopsy to determine the cause of death and to attempt identification, though it was clear that the extensive damage and effects of the fire would make this difficult. Forensic experts determined that the body belonged to a young man who had suffered a brutal death. The victim had multiple injuries inflicted while he was alive, indicating prolonged and severe assault. Almost all of his teeth had been knocked out or damaged by blows. He had been shot 3 times, twice in the back in a final fatal shot to the head. Additionally, traces of seminal fluid from at least 3 different men were found in his body, along with distinctive tears, suggesting repeated violent assaults. When police checked recent reports of missing young men, Christopher-Newsome fit the description in age, height, and build. The officers contacted his parents and requested DNA samples for confirmation, but strongly advised against personal identification at the morgue as the burnt remains barely resembled human features. Unfortunately, the DNA analysis confirmed that the body belonged to the missing student, Newsome. The search for Shannon. Despite the distressing news about Christopher, Shannon Christian's parents still clung to the hope that their daughter was alive, possibly being held somewhere. Her mobile phone was last pinged on the day the couple disappeared in one of Knoxville's more troubled neighborhoods, a place they wouldn't have visited by choice. This indicated that they were likely brought there against their will, and Shannon might still be held in the area. In a secluded alley of this neighborhood, Shannon's Toyota 4Runner was found abandoned. It was in a terrible state, so much so that Dina and Gary Christian hardly recognized their daughter's car. The SUV was dirty, scratched, with broken headlights and deflated tires. All of Shannon's personal belongings were missing from the car, which was littered with cigarette butts, and the seats were torn and stained. The driver's seat was pushed far back, suggesting that a large adult male had been the last one to drive it. A crumpled envelope with the address 2316 Chipman Street was found on the floor between the seats, likely dropped by the perpetrator. A local witness reported seeing 4 African-American males driving the SUV that Saturday evening, a vehicle that stood out in that area. Fingerprints on the envelope led the police to Lymericus Davidson, previously convicted for serious offenses. His residence, located in an industrial area near a wasteland, lacked witnesses. When no one responded to the police's knock and offered to surrender, they forced entry, hoping to find Shannon alive inside. Inside the house, they found Shannon's purse, a stuffed toy from her car, as well as Christopher's headphones and baseball cap, a knife with blood traces torn and blood-stained fragments of women's clothing, and Shannon's lifeless body were discovered in the house's trash chute system hidden under dirty sheets. She was bound in the fetal position and wrapped in 5 trash bags. Experts later concluded that she likely passed away in the early hours of Monday, January 8th. This tragic finding suggested that if the police had begun their search immediately after the missing persons report, rather than waiting for 24 hours, Shannon might have been saved. A horrific state of suffering. The condition of Shannon Christian's body was a horrifying sight even for seasoned forensic experts, as there was not a single untouched area on her. Shannon was covered from head to toe with bruises, abrasions, cuts, and cigarette burns. The numerous tears and injuries to her genital area, as well as her oral cavity and throat, indicated that she had been subjected to multiple assaults by several men. Shannon sustained a serious head injury and internal bleeding in the abdominal area, likely resulting from being kicked. Furthermore, the merciless assailants inflicted several penetrating, though not fatal, stab wounds on her and extinguished dozens of cigarettes on her skin. In a brutal attempt to destroy DNA evidence on her body, the perpetrators doused her with household bleach, paying particular attention to bleeding wounds and her genital area. She was also forcibly made to ingest bleach. After these torturous acts, Shannon, still alive, was wrapped in 5 trash bags and then shoved into a household trash chute covered with sheets and rags. She slowly suffocated and bled to death, helplessly trapped with no chance of escape or calling for help. 5 merciless perpetrators. Lymericus Davidson, in whose house the mutilated body of Shaman Christian and personal belongings of the deceased Christopher-Newsome were found, was immediately declared a fugitive. The police also tracked down another suspect, Eric Boyd, whose traces were found at the crime scene. Boyd was apprehended on January 11th without resistance and agreed to cooperate with the investigation, claiming he wouldn't go to prison for crimes he didn't commit. Boyd revealed that Davidson was hiding in a vacant house listed for sale and personally led the police to the location. Davidson, unprepared for this turn of events, was caught off guard and offered no resistance. Notably, at the time of his arrest, Davidson was wearing sneakers that had belonged to the deceased student. During interrogations, Davidson tried to minimize his role, portraying himself as a victim. He claimed that the couple had come to his house looking to buy banned substances, but were caught up in a conflict with his acquaintances. Davidson insisted that he left to avoid involvement, and the subsequent brutal acts occurred in his absence. Further interrogations revealed 3 more individuals involved in the case: Davidson's friend, George Thomas, his half-brother, Latalvis Cobbins, and an 18-year-old woman named Vanessa Lynn Coleman. Once all 5 suspects were in custody, they were placed in separate cells and interrogated individually. Each tried to deflect blame onto the others, inadvertently revealing details of the heinous crime. Their fragmented accounts helped piece together the event's chronology and each perpetrator's role in the brutal act. A timeline of tragic events. Lamarcus Davidson, who had been released from prison on parole just a few months before these events, was desperately in need of money. He was involved in the sale of banned substances and urgently required a vehicle to deliver these to his customers. Davidson decided to steal a car from an underground parking lot known for its lack of surveillance cameras and headed there with his accomplices. Tragically, at that moment, students Shannon and Christopher were in the parking lot arguing over Chris' delay. The criminals, deciding to leave no witnesses, forced the couple into the trunk of a car at gunpoint. The pair was taken to Davidson's house where they were brutally beaten and repeatedly assaulted. After midnight, a barefoot and undressed Christopher was again forced into the trunk and taken to the railroad tracks. He was ordered to walk on the stones before being shot twice in the back. His torment was ended with a final shot to the head. His body was then doused with a flammable liquid and set on fire in hopes of destroying any evidence that could lead to the perpetrators. Having dealt with Newsome, the criminals returned to the house where Shannon remained bound. She endured horrific cruelty the next day, leaving her without a single uninjured area on her body. The sadists concluded their torture by dousing her with bleach and packing her still alive into plastic trash bags where she slowly suffocated. The exact moment when young Vanessa Coleman joined the group was unclear. During interrogations, she claimed to be a hostage herself, participating in the torture out of fear for her life. However, Boyd indicated that Coleman was Davidson's girlfriend and willingly participated in the events, even taking some of Shannon's jewelry and mobile phone. Further, a personal diary found at Vanessa's home contained her descriptions of the horrors at her boyfriend's house, which she referred to as an exciting adventure. The initial trials and sentences. During the investigation, it was established that Lamarcus Davidson, born in 1981, was the leader of the criminal group and the primary instigator of the brutal acts against the innocent victims. Davidson tried to deflect blame and downplay his role in the atrocities, attempting to shift responsibility onto the deceased themselves. Davidson claimed that the couple came to his house to buy banned substances and later suggested engaging in rough intimacy with him and his friends, a situation he said spiraled out of control. Remarkably, the defendant's lawyers latched on to this version, attempting to tarnish the reputations of the deceased in court. The parents of the victims later expressed immense emotional anguish over these claims. Nevertheless, Davidson was found guilty on 40 counts, including assault, kidnapping, robbery, and particularly cruel and premeditated termination of life, among others. The jury unanimously decided that Davidson deserved the death penalty for his heinous acts. Latalvis Cobbins, born in 1982, faced the death penalty for his role in the torture, assaults, and involvement in the termination of life. However, he was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. George Thomas, born in 1983, received a similar life sentence for his involvement in the same crimes with no chance of release. Eric Boyd, considering his cooperation with the investigation and assistance in capturing Davidson, was sentenced to 18 years of imprisonment. The relatives of both victims found this sentence outrageously lenient. As for Vanessa Coleman, born in 1988, the only female participant in the atrocities, the investigation proved her involvement in the torture, assaults, and in Shannon's tragic end. She was sentenced to 53 years in prison. overturned verdicts and new hearings in 2011 while the criminals were serving their sentences and Davidson awaited execution. The case took an unexpected turn. The presiding judge resigned, admitting to a substance dependency. His ability to conduct trials was questioned, and his verdicts over the last 2 years were annulled, leading to new hearings, including the case of Christian-Newsome. A new judge scheduled hearings for all 5 individuals involved in the student's tragic end. After the retrials, Davidson's sentence remained unchanged: death penalty. Taubens continued to serve his life sentence without the possibility of parole. Thomas, however, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Vanessa Coleman's sentence was reduced from the original 53 years to 35 years. Her appeal in 2014 was rejected, and parole was denied in 2017. In 2020, the parole board decided she would remain incarcerated at least until April 2032. Eric Boyd's situation changed most dramatically. Originally receiving a relatively short sentence for cooperating with the investigation, his involvement in the assaults and tragic end of both victims was later proven. His retrial resulted in a life sentence without parole, with his accomplice, Thomas, testifying against him, revealing previously unknown details about Boyd's role. For his testimony, Thomas, who initially had the possibility of parole after 51 years, had his sentence reduced by 15%, contingent on good behavior. Boyd's attempts to appeal his new sentence were unsuccessful. He is currently serving his sentence in the Bledsoe County Correctional Complex. Davidson remains in the maximum security Riverbend institution awaiting the execution of his death sentence. Public reaction and the case's impact. As previously mentioned, this trial garnered significant attention, widely covered in the press and leading to the enactment of 2 laws. The first was aimed at protecting victims from defamation, attempts to shift blame onto them and portraying them negatively. This was in response to the defense strategy of the accused and their lawyers, who tried to label the students as drug users and thrill seekers in a troubled neighborhood. These claims were completely false and caused immense pain and suffering to the victims' families. The second law eliminated the need for a judge's signature on a jury's unanimous verdict, which, if in place during this case, could have prevented the need for retrials and sentence reviews. The house at 2316 Chipman Street, which became a torture chamber for the young couple, was demolished in the fall of 2008. A memorial was erected on the site in honor of Shaman Christian and Christopher-Newsome. In memory of Christian, a golf tournament and a Christian charity foundation were established, providing support to victims of violence. Similarly, a foundation in Newsome's name was created, holding annual memorial baseball tournaments at Halls Park and awarding a scholarship named after the deceased student and former baseball player. It's important to note that despite the public outcry and widespread attention, the media initially misrepresented details of the case, either accidentally or intentionally. Many believe that the variations in reporting and delayed coverage were influenced by racial motives as the victims were white and the perpetrators were African American. However, the head of the Association of Criminal Writers and Editors noted, "I can't confidently say that this case would have received more attention if 5 white criminals had been accused of committing similar atrocities against 2 black individuals." Additionally, the Knoxville police chief stated that there was no evidence to suggest these crimes were committed based on racial animosity. Kelly Clayton had everything going for her. First of all, she was quite smart and bright since high school. She was a role model for other students, active in school, excelled in tests, and passed exams just as well. At the same time, outwardly, she never looked like a girl who spent days nights sitting over textbooks, cramming lessons, and writing out something from additional literature. No, on the contrary, her looks were considered model-like, and if her grades had left much to be desired, she could have built a modeling career. She could have, but she didn't. After high school, she went to Teacher Training University to become a chemistry teacher. The insane pride of her parents, but only for the first few years of university. It is not known what turning point happened to her then. But one day, Kelly took her documents from the institution and, calling her parents, said that she no longer wanted to study, that she was too young to spend the rest of her life checking notebooks and raising ungrateful children. If she wants to, she will definitely return to her educational endeavors. In the meantime, She wants to travel and live life to her heart's content. Not the best idea, according to her parents, who were so upset that they didn't communicate with their daughter for 6 months. But perhaps if it wasn't for this desperate act, Kelly would never have met Tom Clayton. They met at a party of mutual friends, and the young man really liked the girl. Firstly, he, from the first minutes of acquaintance, began to court Kelly and show signs of attention. And secondly, Tom had a beautiful appearance and athletic physique, and all because the guy was a hockey star. For 4 consecutive seasons, he played for the semi-professional team Jackals. And in it, he was considered a strong man, a player who was able to break the opponent's ribs only if he did not approach the gate. But only a sports career, and especially built on strength and aggression, will someday fail, and Tom had to put the stick in the far corner and enjoy hockey only from the stands or from the couch watching his favorite team on the TV screen. The couple had to move on with their lives, and first they returned to New York where they got married, then moved to North Carolina, and then moved to the tiny town of Cato, numbering only a few thousand people. There, Tom franchised a company to rebuild houses after fires or disasters and worked in a related profession for a friend's company. As for Kelly, after dropping out of university, she worked as a waitress, only changing places, and now she had 2 children. However, Tom was earning well enough, and Kelly could quit her job at any time and take care of her beautiful daughters. But she still believed that extra money would never be superfluous. Besides, she could use it to blue toys for her children and spoil them in every possible way. On September 28, 2015, Tom, as usual, went to play poker with his friends, the Millers. He never took his wife to such events. Playing for money implied certain skills and experience in the game. Besides, someone had to stay at home with the children, and a family trip would have turned such gatherings into a noisy buffoonery and would not have brought any pleasure from gambling. That evening, Tom was not lucky in the game, but he did not get up from the table, but on the contrary tried to win back and offered anyone who wanted to stay to play until morning. But no one supported him, and he went home. At home, however, a terrible picture opened before him. His beloved wife was lying in her own pool of blood, badly beaten and, at first glance, was not breathing. Tom panicked and ran through the rooms looking for his children, and luckily, they were fine but very frightened. He grabbed his daughters and headed to his neighbor Derek's house, trying to make sure the children didn't see their mother's mutilated body. And already from the neighbor's house, he dialed the police number. The officer who arrived on the scene found Tom sitting on his knees in front of his wife's body, trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were able to pull the man away, who voiced the terrible and unpleasant information. Kelly had been dead for a long time, and neither they nor he could do anything to help her. All 2 floors of the house were drenched in blood. A major mess was in the bedroom. Apparently, there had been a struggle between Kelly and the perpetrator who had committed his atrocity, despite the fact that there were children in the house at the time. Kelly was pushed down the stairs, evidenced by the knocked-down banister, and beaten on the head with a blunt object until they were sure she was dead. There were no hints of knife or gunshot wounds. The policeman who filmed the crime scene noted to himself that Tom was shocked by what had happened and seemed lost in space. He walked from one corner of the room to another, entered the room for a split second, and immediately left it. And he could not tell the policeman where the children's room was, or where the emergency exit from the house was. But when asked where Tom himself was at the time of the murder, he answered calmly that he had been at a friend's house all evening, where they were playing poker. Then the policeman, who did not get any clear information from Tom, went to the neighbors to ask some questions of the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, referred to the perpetrator as a robber. According to the words of the eldest daughter, she and her sister were almost asleep, but they heard their mother start screaming loudly from the next room, and then the whole place shook like an earthquake. The girls, after listening to their mother, cautiously went out of their room, but saw the criminal leaning over their mother and beating her with what appeared to them to be a hammer. The girls ran back into the nursery, closed the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. It was a good thing. The criminal wasn't looking for them, because that nightstand, as the policeman pointed out, was so small that it would hardly have apprehended a burglar. Say, what did this burglar look like? Well, he was a big one like a bear. That big? Wow. What was he wearing? Blue jeans and a black shirt. He was also wearing a mask, like the one Daddy wears when he goes hunting with Mr. Bourne to shoot ducks. So your daddy has a mask like that too. Will you show me? I'd have to ask him where it is. I don't know. What else did you notice when you saw the robber? He had eyes like Dad's, and I don't remember anything else. I saw him literally just a little bit, got scared, and we quickly ran back inside. Police officers checking the house were unable to confirm the girl's account that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at either the front or back door, although on the other hand, the gate to the garage was open, and the perpetrator could have entered the house through the garage. Another thing that the police noted is that nothing was stolen from the house. Jewelry was left untouched lying in a jewelry box, and the safe where Tom kept the cash was not even touched. The doors of the cabinets in the house were also all closed. Usually, burglars check every little cabinet, every shelf, but here the whole mess was the aftermath of a fight. Experienced officers, it would seem, understood everything at once. Tom pretends to be a heartbroken husband, and it was he who killed his beloved wife and the mother of his children in order to further receive insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured and husbands' murderers developing a crime plan always ensure the life of their wives, then in case of her death, he could get up to $1 million. All that's needed is to gather evidence and the case will be solved. Especially since even her own daughter said that the mask on the robber was like her father's and eyes like her father. However, the police did not find the hunting mask in the house. After finding out where Tom had spent his time that night, the police questioned the other poker players. Is Tom the killer? Do you really suspect him? Wondered one of his friends. That poor guy had his wife murdered for crying out loud. And instead of looking for the bastard, you want to pin everything on him? How could you think of such a thing? No, Tom certainly couldn't have done it. I've known him a long time, replied another less emotional friend. He worked 2 jobs around the clock because he loved both Kelly and his kids. There's just no way that could happen. Plus, he was with us all night. We played poker, and even when everyone was tired, he kept insisting on continuing to play. Tom really was suspicious that evening, said his acquaintance Laura. During a break in the game, he took me into the next room and asked me to give him my phone to call his wife. He supposedly forgot his phone in the car and didn't want to go get it. I was first surprised that the car was 10 meters away from the house. Go to it and get the phone, but still gave him a call. He stepped back to make the call outside. I didn't hear who or what he was talking to, but when I decided to check the outgoing calls, there were no numbers in the call history, so he just deleted the call. Wouldn't you agree that's odd? I told my husband about it, and he was as surprised as I was. My husband was sitting at the playing table next to Tom and noticed that Tom was not watching the process of dealing cards or watching the people around him, which is very important in poker, but was sitting with his head bowed over the surface of the table where the cards were hiding the screen of his phone. He had his phone on him. Why had he tricked me then? Where was he calling? Who couldn't he call from his phone? After Laura's testimony, the police once again questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and the girl repeated what she had told the policeman the first time. The robber looked a lot like her father. The next testimony was given by the niece of the murdered already after Tom was behind bars. I didn't tell Aunt Kelly. I just didn't want to upset her. She was very fond of Tom. She literally loved him. And besides, she has 2 children by him. They are my sisters. Who needs my truth? Tom was not the man he appeared to be at first glance. Yes, he occasionally spoiled my aunt with attention and flowers. He could easily babysit, which other fathers rarely do. But that was all at home. And at work, he was a completely different person. Kelly decided to help me one day and arranged for Tom to take me to work for him. She was too young to be on her own, so she understood me as well as anyone and wanted the best for me. I worked for Tom all last summer doing correspondence registration and document management. I didn't know him well before that, so at first we had a strictly working relationship. Then he got drunk somewhere and came to the office in that state. There was no one there but me and him, and for some reason, he started to tell me that his family was fictitious. He loves his daughters very much, but he doesn't care about his wife, and he hasn't had any feelings for her for a long time. He's even had a few affairs on the side during their marriage and even considered leaving Aunt Kelly, but he didn't, simply because he was afraid that a divorce might leave him without a house and without money. Looking ahead, it is important to note that some of the interviewed female participants of that evening's poker game confirmed the words of Kelly's niece that Tom was not such a faithful husband and had a sexual relationship with two women who were also playing poker that night. In addition to the information about Tom's promiscuous life, Kelly's 16-year-old niece also told about another employee of Tom's firm, Michael Beard. Michael was doing repair work on houses after the fire, and he was doing a good job. But there was one moment in those houses where Bird worked, constantly missing things, and if the first few times Tom did not believe his customers, referring to the fact that during the fire, the owners could lose something. Then, when the accusations of theft began to be repeated for the third and fourth time, there was no doubt. Michael Bird not only restores the floor and walls, but also steals. Plus, in addition to stealing, there were complaints that Michael was allowing himself to come to work drunk. I was in the office when Michael's stealing came to light. Tom could yell at his employee and kick him out on the street. He was upset with his subordinate's behavior like that. He kept asking him, "How could you? Or haven't you thought about your family? Where are you going to work now?" After the incident, Tom fired Bird, but still called companies he knew and offered them to hire his former employee. Tom recommended Michael, and when all his options were exhausted, Tom took Bird in to help with the household, cutting the grass, watering the plants, doing minor repairs around the house. The detective called Michael Beard in for questioning. He said he only stole because he and his family needed the money. Tom was very good to me, defended me to the end, but I know it was my own fault. He has a very good wife. She fed me when I worked for them even though she really shouldn't have. She also gave my children clothes that her daughters had grown out of. I am very grateful for all they have done for me. I feel so bad for Kelly. When I heard about her death, I couldn't believe my ears. I felt so bad. I even went to church and prayed for her to go to the best of all worlds. The police did not find anything strange in Michael's story and let him go. But the interrogation of his wife, Mrs. Bird, made the police doubt his words. According to his wife, Holly, Tom offered Michael some work, which he did not say. And for this work, he promised to pay him $10,000. Now that was interesting. Michael was called back to the station and had a lie detector hooked up to him. All questions were failed. Bird was lying and therefore failed the test. Realizing he couldn't get away with it, he began to testify. Indeed, Tom promised Bird $10,000 if Michael, on the day when Tom will play poker, sneak into his house, kill his wife and set a fire in his house. The plan was to strangle Kelly and then make it look like she just burned to death in an accidental fire. Plus, the family home was insured for a very large sum of money. As the police checked, it was true. Kelly's home and life were insured at the highest rate. 2 cans of gasoline were waiting for Michael in the garage through which the house was to be entered. Everything was fine here. Bird entered the house when everyone was already asleep. He quietly began to climb the stairs and reach the bedroom where Kelly was supposed to be sleeping. But the young woman was either awake or awakened by the sound of the open door. And when she saw a strange man in the doorway, she began to scream in fright. Mike Hale was just as frightened and pounced on Kelly, trying to close his huge hands around her neck. But it wasn't that easy. Kelly began to fight back. "I had no idea that a seemingly fragile Kelly had so much strength in her," says Michael. A heck of a fight ensued, which spilled over from the second-floor bedroom to the first-floor kitchen. Michael, because of the shock and panic, could not concentrate on the fight, but only waved his arms in all directions or just grabbed Kelly's clothes while Kelly, defending her life, aimed very accurately at Michael's face. And if the police had come to Bird earlier, they would have seen the marks from the beatings on him. But everything turned out as it did. After a long struggle, Michael hit Kelly's head against the wall with all his might. She fell, and for a while couldn't find the strength to get up. Michael took out a hammer and began hitting the young woman's head with it until she stopped showing signs of life. Michael, maddened by what had happened, just ran out of the house, even forgetting that Tom asked him not only to kill Kelly, but also to set the house on fire to cover up the crime. Michael had an accomplice, Mark Blandford, who, in fact, served only as a driver. The day before it happened, I got a call from Michael. I had worked with him on a construction site for a long time, and I had stayed with him for a couple weeks last year, so I knew him well. I knew Michael was into petty theft, so when he called me and asked me to drive while he broke into someone's house, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to turn him down, but he offered me $500. I thought long and hard at first, but he talked me into it. He said he just wanted to rob a businessman, and he needed help to get out of there before the cops got there. He said he'd help with the car. I gave in to his entreaties, but on the condition that I park somewhere far away from the house, he agreed. That evening I waited for him in that car in a dark alley, and he came back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling me to move as fast as possible. He didn't have any bag or sack on him, which didn't look much like a robbery. I didn't ask him any questions along the way, simply because I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted my $500, which, by the way, I didn't end up getting. On the way out, he asked me to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of here. I stopped there. He hastily stripped off his outer garments and threw them off the bridge. If you need to be shown the place, I'll show you. Indeed, police officers who arrived on the scene at Mark's behest found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. There was no question of murder. When he went into the house, however, Kelly was already dead. And who killed her? The detective asked. I think it was Tom. He offered me money for murder and arson from the beginning, but I refused the first offer. I'm not willing to kill a man for any money. He said I had nothing to fear, but he never could talk me into it. You may not believe me, but I almost lost my mind when I saw Kelly's body. I knew right then and there that he was setting me up, so I ran out of the house. He's the killer, Michael insisted. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Bird had thrown out his things, and that his clothes as well as the murder weapon had already been submitted for examination. And the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. In turn, Tom also did not admit that it was he who ordered the massacre of his wife from a former problem employee of his company. According to him, Michael knew that he had money, knew that he was not poor, and because Bird lost his job as well as because of resentment associated with the dismissal, he decided to rob his house, but Kelly was at home that night, for which he paid with his life. It might have been difficult to prove Tom's guilt and his conspiracy with Michael if Laura, the woman who had been playing poker that night, had not told the police that Tom had called from her cell phone. The detective requested a transcript of her calls, and expectations were confirmed. Then, on the night of September 28, 29, Tom Clayton called Michael Beard. Michael was the first to go to trial. He continued to insist that he had been hired to set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance, set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance payout. He didn't kill Kelly. And as for the blood on his clothes, it was just because he was touching a dead and mutilated body. That's why he got dirty. He'd thrown his stuff away so no one would think he'd been at Clayton's house that night. His speech sounded convincing. The jury had been deliberating for 7 hours. In the end, they concluded that Michael Beard was guilty on all counts. He was facing life in prison. As for Tom, his lawyers were able to obtain records of conversations and correspondence between him and Michael, and none of the conversations clearly discussed their devious plan. The prosecution's requests for billing transcripts of his movements yielded no concrete results either. All the evidence was circumstantial. If it weren't for one nuance, the car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company, and Tom, coming to the office on his personal Toyota, left it in the parking lot where for some reason moved to the company pickup truck, which later drove to Michael's house and left there and took back the day after the tragedy. That is, in fact, he gave Michael the car on which he and Mark went to the crime. It was this fact that was testified to at the trial by the jury. The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury concluded that Tom had hired Michael to commit this horrible crime after all. Michael in turn filed an appeal. In his defense, he used the words of little Charlie, who said that the eyes in the slit of the mask belonged to her father. However, The court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. The court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. As a result, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard received life sentences. As for Mark, he was charged with manslaughter, for which he received 4 years in prison. Tom and Kelly's children were given custody to Kelly's sister, Kim. After some time, Charlie has moved on from the tragedy. She occasionally remembers her mom, but absolutely won't talk about her father, who she will never see again. The events described in this video took place in 2008 in Auburn, Alabama, USA. Although 15 years have passed since then, the final word in the Lauren Burke case has yet to be spoken. Andre Pries Jr. was a gifted athlete who excelled in basketball, baseball, and bowling, earning numerous trophies throughout his youth. However, baseball was his greatest passion. He attended multiple baseball camps and earned a varsity letter in the sport at Montebello High School in Denver, Colorado. After graduating in 1992, Andre pursued his dream by trying out for several minor league teams, although he was never signed. Around the time of his high school graduation, Andre became a father to a daughter, Desiree. Determined to provide for her, he worked tirelessly while balancing multiple responsibilities. He attended Aurora Community College with aspirations to study psychology and real estate, worked as an apprentice electrician for Denver Public Schools, and assisted his father at the family car lot. On the evening of June 27, 1995, Andre asked his mother, Suzanne, if she could watch 3-year-old Desiree so he could visit his cousin, 22-year-old Jerry Baker. Suzanne agreed with the condition that Andre return home by 10 p.m., as she had work early the next morning. At 9:50 that night, Andre and Jerry were outside Jerry's home in the 5,500 block of Yuba Way in Denver's Montebello neighborhood. A group of men, between 24 depending on the account, walked up the street and approached the two cousins. Shortly thereafter, shots rang out. Jerry was shot in the neck but survived the injury. Andre was not as lucky. He was shot 7 times in the back and pronounced dead after he arrived at the hospital. He was just 21 years old. It has long been theorized that there are witnesses with information in the case who have been too afraid to come forward. One theory in the case is that Andre's cousin Jerry was the intended victim that night, as he had recently testified at a murder trial. The defendant in that case was found guilty. Even if Andre's death is not tied to this specific criminal case, his killers do appear to have intimidated members of the community into inaction based on the lack of information coming into the authorities and problems Andre's family has encountered while asking for help in the case. Andre's mother, Suzanne, despite her grief at the loss of her son, began working on the case herself almost immediately. She held fundraisers to start a fund for a reward. She posted flyers. She knocked on doors in the neighborhood and asked people if they had seen anything. Her efforts angered someone in the community, and her car windows were smashed in while the car was parked in front of her house. Suzanne was not deterred, however. "It has never scared me. It only made me stronger," she said in 2011. Andre's case is still being pursued by the Denver Police Department's cold case investigative unit, largely due to the efforts of Suzanne Price. This case landed on my desk because the mom is keeping it very much alive. She's actively invested in trying to find out who's responsible for the death of her son, Detective Carrie Johnson said in 2019. Detective Johnson also said that there is evidence in the case that can be retested with more advanced methods, but witnesses will need to come forward to identify suspects in the case in order for it to finally be solved. Suzanne worked as an aircraft appearance coordinator for Frontier Airlines, supervising one of the teams that cleans the airline's planes at the Denver airport. In 2010, she appeared on an episode of the CBS show Undercover Boss, unknowingly training the airline's CEO Brian Bedford on how to quickly clean a plane in between flights. Bedford was both impressed by Suzanne's work and personality and moved by Andre's story. As a result, he offered to name an aircraft after Andre. Suzanne was also allowed to choose the animal that appeared on the plane's tail. She chose an antelope because, like Andre, it was very fast. The plane bearing Andre's name was on April 1, 2011. Suzanne cleaned the plane several weeks later on Mother's Day, making sure that it was the cleanest plane in the fleet. Suzanne retired at the end of 2019 with plans to dedicate the time she previously spent working to investigating her son's case. 31-year-old Steven Lynch was from the Glenshain estate in Tala, South Dublin. He lived for his family and was the oldest of 4 siblings, a devoted partner to his girlfriend Kelly, and a loving father of 3 children. On April 13, 2017, Steven was walking in Brookview Close, just a few miles from his home on his way to his mother's house. Just before 7 p.m., he was deliberately struck by a silver Ford Focus. The car then drove over him and dragged him down the road. The occupants of the car abandoned and ran from it, and it is believed that at least one of them got into a red Volkswagen Polo, which was later found abandoned in Crumlin, another suburb of Dublin. One passerby unsuccessfully tried to run after one of the individuals fleeing the car, and others worked to free Steven from under the car and then resuscitate him. They, too, were unsuccessful, and Steven did not survive his extensive injuries. The Gardaí were able to trace down the owners of the 2 cars and identify 4 suspects in the case. Neither of the cars had been reported stolen at the time of the incident, but the owner of the Ford Focus would later try to report that the vehicle had been stolen before Steven's murder. The 4 suspects, all men in their late teens or early 20s, could not be located by the Gardaí at their homes. The 4 men had ties to criminal activity in Crumlin and had at least one known associate who was very violent. They were connected to a drug-related feud over a debt that was responsible for escalating violence in Crumlin. Steven Lynch had no such connections to crime, a fact the Gardaí were able to quickly confirm. They believed that Steven was hit with a car after he got into a verbal altercation with the men inside of it. Steven yelled at the car to slow down as it sped down the street. As there were children playing nearby, Steven feared would be hit by the speeding car. This would be very much in line with Steven's personality. He is known to have saved the lives of at least 5 people in 3 different incidents. While suspects were quickly identified in the case, no one has ever been charged in it. In February of 2019, the Director of Public Prosecutions determined that the 4 suspects identified immediately after Steven's death would not be tried for Steven's murder due to lack of evidence. The investigation into the case would remain ongoing. While the cars tie the 4 suspects to the scene, witnesses have not come forward to confirm that they were actually in the cars. The lack of witnesses cooperating in the case has been very painful for Steven's family, especially his mother, Vera Donovan. All Steven did was tell the people to slow down because kids were playing on the road, she said in 2018. We are talking about the kids of witnesses who have not yet come forward. There were dozens of people outside that day. As painful as the loss of Steven is, the lack of cooperation from the community, presumably due to fear of the criminals responsible, makes it even worse. Vera says that the wall of silence from the people who witnessed Steven's death is slowly killing her and torturing her family. I walk past people in the street who witnessed my son's murder, but they are still choosing to remain silent, she said in 2019. It's never been about revenge for us. All we want is justice. Vera has vowed to never give up in her fight for justice for Steven. She actively works with the Gardaí, gives media interviews to keep attention on the case and beg witnesses to come forward, and uses social media to keep Steven's memory alive. In particular, she is very active on the memorial page for Steven on Facebook. There she posts letters to her late son, telling him how much she misses him and promising to keep fighting for him. Vera's continued efforts to bring her son's killers to justice, in particular her use of Facebook to do so, have made her the subject of threats. A get-well-soon card was sent to her house, and inside of it was written the warning, "Keep your mouth shut on Facebook." Just a few weeks later, she received a letter telling her, "If you don't stay away from Brookview, you will be joining your son." Vera refuses to let the threats deter her from fighting to get justice for her son. "A light in my world was switched off when my son was taken from me, but I will never stop fighting for him," she said just before the 2nd anniversary of Steven's death. "I won't be intimidated by anyone, and I will always be the voice for my wonderful son. I don't have my first child in my life, and there's nothing else they can do to me." In the summer of 1985, 20-year-old Kristen O'Connell was preparing to go into her junior year of college. The Burnsville, Minnesota native loved to travel, which led her to majoring in hotel and restaurant at the University of Wisconsin-Stout. Her dream was to move to Hawaii and open a hotel there. Her spring break trip that year had taken her to Florida, where she met a young man from Ovid, New York. He invited her to visit him over the summer, and she accepted his invitation. She arrived at Syracuse Hancock International Airport on August 12th, and one of her father's business associates gave her a ride to Ovid. She stayed with the man she met in Florida in his rented mobile home behind the Golden Buck Tavern on County Route 139. Kristen attended a party held at the mobile home on the night of August 14th. Around 11:30, she left the party barefoot, took over a walk, leaving her purse behind, indicating that she planned to come back to the home. Kristen did not drink or use drugs, so she may have left the party because she was uncomfortable with the alcohol being consumed at the party. A witness saw her walking west on County Route 139 between 11:50 and 12:10. They also witnessed a green or blue car pull up alongside her and a second vehicle pull off the road behind her. Between midnight and 12:15, another witness saw Kristen, who turned around and was now headed east. The witness also reported that Kristen was being followed by two men who were roughly 50 feet behind her. One of the men was estimated to be between 6 feet and 6 feet 2 inches tall with shoulder-length hair. He was wearing blue jeans and possibly a jean jacket. The other man was shorter, around 5 feet 10 inches tall. He had brown hair and a thin build. Kristen was reported missing after she failed to return to the party. On August 16th, her body was discovered in a cornfield along County Route 139. She was nude with her clothes in a pile nearby, but had not been sexually assaulted. Her throat had been slashed and she had several other stab wounds. Defensive wounds indicated that she had fiercely fought her killer. Kristen had called her mother the day before she was killed to tell her that she would be coming home earlier than planned, although she did not specify why. It may have been because she learned upon arriving in Ovid that the young man she had come to visit had a girlfriend. He and all the other people present at the party that night were cleared of involvement in the crime by the authorities. On August 23rd, a phone call came in to the police. The caller said that if they wanted to identify Kristen's killer, they would need to look in the trunk of a green Chevrolet parked on Main Street in the village of Waterloo. While a blue or green vehicle had been seen pulling up to Kristen during one of the final sightings of her, police were unable to locate the vehicle in Waterloo. The caller had indicated that he would be leaving the area out of fear of the killer, but police believed that the caller may have actually been the killer himself, trying to distract investigators with a false lead. Kristen's parents were actively involved in the case as soon as they learned their daughter was missing. Unfortunately, Kristen's father, Michael, passed away in 1993. He was buried next to his daughter. Kristen's mother, Phyllis, has continued to advocate for her daughter for almost 35 years. "As a mother, I will not give up until I die," Phyllis said in 2015. Phyllis regularly travels from her home in Minnesota to Ovid to meet with the police about the case, ensuring that new investigators stay focused on the case as previous ones retire or are reassigned. She employs a private investigator to run an independent investigation parallel to the one being performed by the police. Phyllis believes that there are witnesses who have information in the case who have not yet come forward and has given media interviews imploring them to reveal what they know. As the years have gone on, she has fought for new techniques to be used to identify DNA on items and evidence in the case. "She was my daughter, and they're not going to kill my daughter and walk away," Phyllis said in 2019. "I'm not going anywhere. I will not rest. I will not give up." Lauren Ashley Burke was born on December 30th, 1989, in Marietta, Georgia, to James Burke and Vivienne Gershon, who later divorced. She had a sister, Jacqueline Burke, and a brother, Chad Burke. After high school, Lauren attended Auburn University, where she pursued a degree in graphic design. She was an active and vibrant member of the campus community, playing lacrosse, participating in Delta Gamma sorority, and earning a reputation among her friends as a cheerful, helpful, and well-liked individual. During high school, Lauren began dating Shawn McQuaid, and their relationship continued as they both enrolled at Auburn University. While education was a priority for the young couple, they often discussed their future together. However, Not all of Lauren's dreams were destined to come true. The morning of March 4th, 2008, began like any other for Lauren. She had breakfast at a cafe with Shawn before heading to her 11 a.m. class. Afterward, she called her father, James, to discuss spring break plans and a dentist appointment. Later in the day, she went to Shawn's dorm and stayed there until the evening. At 8:30 p.m., Lauren was scheduled to meet her classmate, Michael, at the library to work on a study assignment. Around 8 p.m., she left Shawn's dorm to head to the library. By that time, it was already dark outside. Her car, a black 2001 Honda Civic, was parked in the parking lot next to the dorm and she moved towards it. That was the last time Shawn saw Lauren. Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library, started calling her cell phone after she didn't show up for her appointment, but Lauren didn't answer for some reason. He kept calling over and over, and finally he heard Lauren's voice on the other end. She said she wasn't coming to the library because she'd forgotten all about the appointment, and then she hung up. A little later, at about 9 p.m., 911 received a call about an injured girl who had been seen lying on the road between the Farmville Baptist Church and Route 280 on the 147 freeway. It was Lauren. Drivers stopped their cars in the roadway, blocking traffic in both directions. Lauren was lying on her back in the middle of the road, taking slow, deep breaths. She was suffocating. There were many wounds on her body and only socks on her feet. At 9:12 p.m., the first police car arrived on the scene, at which point Lauren was already unconscious. A few minutes later, paramedics arrived, and as they loaded Lauren into the ambulance, her pulse was barely palpable. At 9:35 p.m., Lauren was taken to East Alabama Medical Center, where doctors began trying to save her life. 8 minutes earlier, at 9:27 p.m., 911 dispatchers received multiple reports of a car fire on the Auburn University campus. Firefighters and police were immediately sent to the address the callers gave. Unable to find the owner of the burning car among the crowd of curious students attracted by the fire from their dormitories, police checked the license plates and discovered that the owner of the car was someone named James Burke, a resident of Georgia. James Burke is Lauren's father. The police contacted James by phone and learned that the actual owner of the fire-ravaged Honda was his daughter, Lauren, who attends Auburn University. James immediately asked what was wrong with his daughter, but the police officers had nothing to say. They didn't know where Lauren was and told James that no one was in the burning car. After James talked to the police officer, he immediately started calling his daughter's cell phone, but she didn't answer, which only added to his anxiety. Unable to reach Lauren, James first called friends of his daughter that he knew, but none of them knew anything about her whereabouts or the car fire. He then called his ex-wife and Lauren's mother, Vivian Gershon, hoping that maybe she knew where their daughter might be. Lauren's mother didn't know anything about what had happened either. At 9:40 p.m., Vivian called her daughter's boyfriend, Shawn. That's how Shawn found out that Lauren was missing and that her car had been burned. Shawn, calling mutual acquaintances of Lauren and trying to find out if anyone had seen her that evening, learned that she had canceled a meeting at the library, saying she had forgotten about it. However, Shawn knew for a fact that Lauren hadn't forgotten about her appointment for the evening, as when she left his room about 2 hours ago, she had planned to go straight to the library. While family and friends tried to figure out where Lauren had gone, doctors at East Alabama Medical Center were battling to keep her alive. Since Lauren was brought in unconscious and without any personal belongings or documents, the doctors did not know her name. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, doctors were unable to save Lauren's life. She was pronounced dead. Bullet, which had traveled out, had punctured both of Lauren's lungs. Experts concluded that the muzzle of the gun was only a few inches from Lauren's skin at the time of the shot. Police officers comparing the girls passing at the hospital and the burned-out car on campus, whose owner was missing, quickly realized that the victim, who could not be saved by doctors, was Lauren Burke. The very next day, March 5, 2008, James Burke identified the body of his daughter after visiting from Atlanta. News of Lauren's passing quickly spread around campus. Auburn University released a statement about Lauren Burke's passing, urging students and staff to be extra cautious on and off campus, but assuring them that the campus is safe. Many of you and your parents have called and are understandably concerned. There is no indication of any additional danger to campus or student safety, the statement said. The Delta Gamma Society released a statement about what fraternity representatives called an unexpected and disturbing crime. The society urged how the car fire was connected to it and whether other students should be wary. Both the spot along the road where Lauren Burke was found in the area around her car were processed for evidence. We have put every resource we can into finding the person responsible for this crime, said Auburn Police spokesman Captain Tom Hart. If someone gets hurt or dies, we all feel it, and we won't rest until we find the perpetrator. Stouffer also said that Alabama Governor Bob Riley offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to an arrest in Burke's case. Lauren's charred car was taken to the Auburn Police Department. Investigators from the State Forensic Laboratory and officers from the State Fire Chief's Office sifted through the remains of the car's burned interior. They found scraps of burned clothing, Lauren's melted digital camera, and the car owner's manual. A .38 caliber bullet was found under the front seat, which could mean the interior of the car was the scene of the crime, and the perpetrator had set it on fire to destroy the evidence. Detectives interviewed Lauren's family, friends, and boyfriend. None of them could name a single person who wanted to harm Lauren and was capable of doing so. Knowing that before her passing, Lauren was in a dorm at Shawn's, the investigators searched his room, but nothing was found to link Shawn to the crime. After speaking with Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet in the library, detectives learned that when Lauren answered his phone, he heard a noise similar to that of a moving car. At the same time, it emerged that someone had used Lauren's bank card several times shortly after she was found lying in the road. In all likelihood, the person who had Lauren's bank card was involved in her incident, and the police began looking for him. However, events soon took an unexpected turn. Less than 3 days after Lawrence, passing at 9:55 a.m. on March 7, 2008, in the parking lot of the Walmart supermarket in Newnan, Georgia, about 75 miles from Auburn, a man of African descent attacked a 72-year-old woman as she was getting into her car. The attacker hit her on the head, threatened her, and told her to get in the passenger seat. He himself got into the driver's seat and tried to drive away from the parking lot, but noticed that an eyewitness to the attack was following him, talking to someone on the phone. The thought of the bystander calling the police prompted the perpetrator to return to the Walmart parking lot. He stopped and got out of the stolen vehicle, ran over to a nearby silver Chrysler Sebring, got in and fled the scene in a hurry. A few hours later, four officers chased the fleeing Chrysler at high speed toward Columbus, West Georgia. The driver did not respond in any way to stop, endangering other road users. During the chase, police observed the driver of the Chrysler throwing an object out the window. One of the chase crews stopped and searched for the object. Police officers found a .38 caliber revolver on the side of the road. Meanwhile, the chase continued, but at one point, the perpetrator's vehicle broke down and smoke billowed from under the hood. The driver stopped abruptly in the roadway and opened the door. Next, a police officer who was in pursuit on a motorcycle crashed into the open door. After the collision, the officer flew over the handlebars of the motorcycle and fell to the pavement, only fortunately not seriously injured. The road where the perpetrator stopped was through a forest, and it was into the woods that he rushed to flee. He could not escape, however. The police quickly caught up with him and snapped handcuffs on his wrists. Courtney Lockhart was born on October 20th, 1984. In the words of his family, he was a nice, fun-loving guy until he joined the U.S. Army. He was sent to Iraq in 2004, from which he returned to someone else in 2005, according to his mother. He wasn't the Courtney I knew, his mother said. Courtney was a cheerful guy, but after he returned from Iraq, he never smiled again, never let anyone stand behind him, and sometimes hid in the closet or under the bed. In 2006, Lockhart and his girlfriend, with whom he had by this time broken up, had a daughter. Also in 2006, he was court-martialed for assaulting other soldiers using illegal substances and deserting his unit without permission. He spent 7 months in detention before being dishonorably discharged from the Army in December 2006. As 2008 approached, Lockhart was said to have gone increasingly off the rails. He barely showered, stopped visiting his daughter, and was heavily addicted to illegal substances. Beginning in February 2008, he committed a string of burglaries, and with the exception of a convenience store robbery, his methods were always the same. He would approach the victim from behind as she was getting into her car in the parking lot, threaten her with a gun, demand that she give him her purse, and attempt to take possession of the car. One such crime ended taking the life of Lauren Burke. Lockhart's string of assaults stopped on March 7, 2008 after he attacked a 72-year-old woman and failed to evade a police chase. After his arrest, Courtney Lockhart, 23, was taken to the police station where he confessed that he was the one who kidnapped and took Lauren Burke's life. The interrogation was videotaped and became a key piece of evidence at trial. Plus, Lauren's personal belongings such as her iPad and bank cards were found in his car. He gave a detailed account of the events of the day he kidnapped Lauren. It was Tuesday, March 4, 2008. Lockhart woke up in his silver Chrysler Sebring. He had spent the previous night in his car not far from East Alabama Medical Center. He needed money, so he started driving around Auburn looking for another victim. It's worth noting that all the people he attacked were women, none of them men. His drive ended on the campus of Auburn University, where he parked next to the student dorms. He spent several hours sitting in his car watching the students. Around 8 p.m., he noticed some girl walk up to the car parked next to him and leisurely open the door. It was Lauren. Without thinking long, Lockhart grabbed his revolver and approached Lauren from behind. Poking her with the muzzle of his gun, he asked her how much money she had on her. When he didn't get an answer, he pushed Lauren into the car, into the front passenger seat, and got behind the wheel. According to Lockhart, Lauren said nothing but screamed in fear. When she finally calmed down, she pulled $200 from her purse, handed it to him, and begged him to leave. Instead of leaving, however, he ordered Lauren to take off her clothes. At gunpoint and hearing threats against her, Lauren complied, stripping off everything but a pair of socks. According to Lockhart, there was only one reason he made Lauren undress. He thought that if she had no clothes on, she would not want to escape. Lockhart then began to drive around the streets of Auburn. All the while, he was driving with one hand on the wheel and with the other holding Lauren at gunpoint. She tried to dissuade him from committing the crime, and when he said his life was over, Lauren promised to help him find a job. At some point, her phone started ringing. Lockhart told her to answer it and make something up so no one would suspect anything. It was a call from Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library. When she answered, she said she had forgotten about the meeting and hung up right away. Lockhart said that they continued to drive through the streets of the city, and Lauren wouldn't give up trying to talk him into letting her go. She said she would help him overcome the difficulties he was facing. As they were driving down Highway 147, Lauren opened the door to jump out of the moving car, and at that point, Lockhart said he accidentally fired a shot. As we now know, the fired bullet pierced both of Lauren's lungs, plus she sustained injuries from the fall. She managed to wave to passing drivers before her strength failed her, and she lost consciousness. Lockhart told investigators that he parked outside the church and watched as cars began to stop next to Lauren lying on the pavement. Realizing that the police would be arriving any minute, he hurriedly fled. Planning to destroy the evidence he had left in the car, he drove to a gas station and bought a can of gasoline, which he paid for with Lauren's bank card. He doused the interior of the car with the gasoline he bought, then got in and drove to the campus where he abducted Lauren because his Chrysler was parked there. According to Lockhart, as he drove, he became dizzy from the gasoline fumes, so he rolled down the windows to let air in from the street. You might be wondering why he didn't drive to the campus first and douse Lawrence's car with gasoline there. Why did he drive on a powder keg, since a short circuit or spark could have caused the car to burn up with him? Perhaps it had something to do with Lockhart's mental problems or low IQ, but we shall talk about that a little later. Upon arriving on campus, Courtney took $46, an iPad, and her bank cards from Lawrence's car before setting the car on fire and driving off in his Chrysler. He drove to a gas station where he paid for the gas with Lauren's money. He then returned to campus again to see if the car had burned all the way down. Investigators began to question whether all of Lockhart's testimony was true. They speculated that Lockhart had forced Lauren to undress, not so that she would not run away as he claimed, but for an entirely different purpose. But he could not get what he wanted because Lauren suddenly jumped out of the moving car. Also, the investigators doubted that Lockhart shot Lauren by accident. It seemed unlikely given the fact that Courtney had served in the army and knew well how to handle a gun. It seemed more logical that Lauren realized that Lockhart wasn't going to let her go and decided that her only chance of escape was to jump. She opened the door, and as she jumped out of the car and Lockhart shot her, ballistics testing confirmed that the bullet found in Lauren's car was fired from the gun Lockhart had thrown out the window as he tried to evade a police chase. In addition, experts ran tests and ruled out the possibility of an accidental discharge. The trigger had to be pulled hard enough to make the shot. Lauren's family and friends bid her farewell on March 9th. The same day, investigators interrogated Lockhart for the second time. The next day, he was formally charged multiple times in the Lauren Burke case. The trial began on November 8, 2010. Lockhart's attorneys claimed that their client had a mental illness because of his military service and that the shooting of Lauren was accidental. According to court documents, Lockhart pleaded not guilty by reason of mental defect or insanity. The court was presented with the testimony of a psychologist who testified that Lockhart had an IQ of 86, which is below average, that he had some symptoms from being in combat in the military, but he did not have PTSD, and that Lockhart was immature and not thinking straight. Although the state attempted to introduce evidence of Lockhart's other crimes and his dishonorable conduct in the military, the trial judge excluded that evidence. After the guilt phase of trial, the sentencing phase immediately followed. Lockhart presented witness testimony and evidence in an attempt to cast himself as a war hero who was mentally disturbed by combat and the death of his commanding officer. The jury rendered a special verdict in which an additional aggravating factor was the taking of a person's life in the course of the kidnapping. The jury voted 120 to recommend a sentence of life without parole. The trial judge later disagreed with the jury's advisory sentence and sentenced Lockhart to death. In a 28-page sentencing order, the judge explained why he disagreed with the jury's opinion. He concluded that the kidnapping weighed heavily in favor of the death penalty. The victim was alone, unarmed, and she was chosen by Lockhart at random. The kidnapping is even more egregious because she was taken from a college campus, a place where students should feel safe, and forced into her own car. Lockhart forced her to undress and held her at gunpoint in order to prevent her escape. The court also emphasized that the jury was unaware of Lockhart's crime spree and the true nature of Lockhart's military service. Although the jury heard testimony regarding Lockhart's service, the jury disciplinary record, wrote the judge. The court reasoned that had the jury been aware of the additional facts known to the court, their sentencing recommendation would likely have differed. 15 years have passed since Lauren's death, and Lockhart is still on death row in Alabama and has not given up trying to appeal his sentence. After his conviction and death sentence, he appealed to an Alabama court which upheld the sentence in August 2013. In April 2014, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals denied Lockhart's request for a retrial. He then appealed to the Supreme Court of Alabama. But in September 2014, his motion was again denied. In January 2015, Lockhart appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. In April of that year, the Supreme Court of the United States denied his petition. In 2018, Lockhart made another attempt to challenge the sentence. Lawyers from a human rights organization who represented him tried to convince the court that the lawyers defending Lockhart in 2010 had mishandled the case. Although there were some flaws in Lockhart's 2010 defense, it ultimately did not change the outcome, with the death sentence being upheld again. In April 2021, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals upheld Lockhart's death sentence. Lawrence's parents said they would never give up and would do everything in their power to keep Lockhart's death sentence from being overturned. Courtney Lockhart gave my daughter the death penalty. There's no reason why he shouldn't have the death penalty. That's all I have to say, Burke's father, Jim, said. He didn't give her a second chance. He shouldn't get a second chance either, Lauren's mother, Vivienne, said. As of today, Courtney Lockhart remains on death row in Alabama. Heather Maples, a bright and lively 22-year-old, had recently embarked on an exciting chapter in her life. She was attending college, settling into her job, and embracing the future with optimism. Known for her infectious smile, constant chatter, and uplifting energy, Heather brought joy to everyone around her. Her life seemed full of promise until everything took a tragic turn. On January 7, 2015, Heather failed to show up for work, raising alarm among her friends and colleagues. Tragically, her lifeless body was discovered in her apartment, partially unclothed. The devastating news shocked everyone who knew her. Who had the right to take Heather Maples' life? Detectives faced a daunting challenge, as Heather was well-liked and had no known enemies. The motive for this heinous crime was unclear, leaving investigators grasping for answers. However, a small but crucial detail eventually emerged, one that would ensure Heather's death did not go unpunished and bring the perpetrator to justice. Ain't that in your hand or in your weight? On a typical morning at the real estate agency in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on August 7, 2015, Kelsey Price arrived at work and began her usual tasks. Heather, her friend and colleague, was running late, which wasn't surprising to Kelsey as Heather was known for her lack of punctuality. Kelsey started calling Heather to wake her up, but received no answer. The previous night, Heather had planned to go to a bar with some friends and had asked Kelsey to come get her if she overslept or didn't answer her calls. Therefore, Kelsey wasn't concerned and went to Heather's apartment to wake her up. The girls' apartments were located in the same complex where they worked. Upon arriving, Kelsey found the front door unlocked. Easily entering inside, she saw her friend lying on the bed, sleeping on her stomach, wearing only a crop top and no underwear. Assuming Heather had a wild night, Kelsey tried to wake her up, but there was no response. She then tapped Heather's foot, attempting to rouse her from her sleep, which no one would ever interrupt again. Maple's foot was so cold that Kelsey literally jumped back in horror at the realization of what had happened. Kelsey Price, in horror, stepped out of the apartment and called 911. Soon, emergency services were on the scene. Detective Tommy Massey was one of the first to arrive at the crime scene, and the forensic team meticulously combed through the apartment. Heather was indeed partially undressed with signs of blows on her face. The hair of the poor girl was soaked in blood, which was also splattered on the walls. It was clear she had been brutally beaten, tortured, and actually assaulted. Massey and his colleague, Detective Maples, coincidentally sharing Heather's surname, recalled this crime as a horrifying nightmare. That's understandable, as witnessing such a heart-wrenching scene is extremely difficult. Heather Nicole Maples was born on August 23, 1992 in Ocala, Florida. Her mother jokingly called Heather a hurricane baby. This nickname was entirely justified, as many envied the energy and courage that Heather possessed. In 2004, Jennifer Hunter gave birth to her second child. Heather welcomed a brother, Ryan, into her life with great joy. However, Ryan was later diagnosed with significant developmental delays, and the older sister of her own accord dedicated all her free time to him. She took care of him, happily spent time with him, taught him to speak, walk, and eat on his own. Heather was in the 7th grade at the time and devoted all the following years until graduation to Ryan, showing immense love and dedication to her brother. At the age of 22, Heather Maples made the bold decision to leave her Texas home and embark on a new chapter in Tennessee, pursuing her dream of becoming a psychologist. The journey began with a call from her former classmate, Chaz, inviting her to join him in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he studied. According to him, it was the perfect place for Heather, with a small college town where she could get a great opportunity to prepare for college. Heather accepted, and in January 2015, the future student went to Chaz in Murfreesboro. By the way, their relationship soon turned romantic. A completely different life began for the girl. With the support of her best friend Kelsey, Heather found a job in the office of the residential complex where they lived. Maples was balancing work with her college preparations. Her friends and family supported her. Everything seemed to be going well, but soon her relationship with Chaz began to crumble, which led to a breakup, and Chaz moved away. At the beginning of August, she excitedly called her mother to share this wonderful news. She had been accepted to college. Her mother, filled with pride, was thrilled for Heather's achievement. However, a week later, Heather failed to show up for work, sparking concern and uncertainty. The detectives understood that considering the nature of the crime, it could have been related to Heather's personal life. At that point, most of her friends were considered suspects, and frankly speaking, there were reasons for that. Upon examining the apartment, there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Heather likely knew her attacker and possibly let them in herself. After a thorough investigation of the crime scene, several important pieces of evidence were discovered. Unknown DNA and a hair that did not belong to the victim. All of this was sent for analysis to identify the suspect. However, the most significant piece of evidence was a clear bloody fingerprint on the right side of Heather's bed. Detective Massey explained that if someone had deliberately dipped their finger in ink and intentionally left their mark, it wouldn't have been so clear and precise. Of course, this print was sent for analysis as well. Additionally, Heather's mobile phone was found in the apartment, but without the password, accessing its contents was impossible. This is where Kelsey came in handy. She played a crucial role, not only helping with the phone, but also deciding to inform Heather's mother of her death, believing it would be better coming from someone who loved and cared for Heather. Detective Massey hoped to get a lot of information about Heather from her friend, Kelsey Price. He wanted to know everything about the victim's personal life, especially her relationship with Chaz. Kelsey told the detective that the relationship was quite tense as Chaz had obvious anger management issues. And sometimes, he was too aggressive and cruel towards Heather, so the girl decided to end the relationship herself. Therefore, the police immediately decided to investigate Chaz. But an unexpected turn of events occurred. A young man named Michael was determined to access the crime scene despite the caution tape. He had keys to Heather's apartment. According to Michael, on the evening before her death, Heather called him and invited him for dinner, which he accepted. Immediately after dinner, Michael went home, unlike Heather, who went to a local bar with friends. But later, Heather reached out to Michael for help as Michael recounted Heather was in trouble. A young man named Ortavio was bothering her and was quite aggressive. Immediately after the incident, Michael offered to drive Heather home. As per his statement, it was around 2:30 in the morning on August 7th, the last time he saw Heather. Additionally, during the interrogation, Michael mentioned that Heather's front door should have been unlocked because he had her keys since she was dressed in a dress and didn't have pockets to carry them, and he simply forgot to return them after unlocking the door. Michael was very disappointed and did not seem like a liar at all, but investigators had to take his fingerprints and a DNA sample. They also contacted the bar to obtain surveillance footage, which confirmed everything Michael had said during the interrogation. Analysis confirmed that the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene did not match his. After Michael was cleared as a suspect, investigators turned their attention to the man who had been with Heather that night, Ortavio. With Kelsey's help in unlocking Heather's mobile phone, interest in Ortavio significantly increased. Detectives discovered that Heather had messaged Ortavio, a friend of hers, inviting him to her apartment just hours before she was found dead. But why did Heather call Ortavio to her home after Michael had saved her from him? The answer was simple. They were friends and became more persistent than usual at the bar. Heather was caught off guard. She wasn't prepared for this. Now the detectives needed to speak with Ortavio to get his side of the story. The detectives immediately realized that Ortavio was unaware of Heather's death. But what if he was somehow involved in this case? Meanwhile, the interrogation continued. The detectives intensified their questioning of Ortavio using a tough that not every suspect could withstand. Ortavio was shocked by what he heard. It seemed he genuinely didn't know what had happened to Heather. Following the interrogation, he willingly agreed to a DNA test, confident that it would clear his name. The results proved him right as the DNA found at the crime scene did not match his, leading to his exclusion as a suspect. Without any leads, the detectives worked practically around the clock reviewing surveillance footage, scrutinizing every detail provided by witnesses. On 9th day of the investigation, as Detective Massey was preparing to leave the office late at night, he received a crucial call from one of the directors of the forensic laboratory. Massey finally got the answer regarding the bloody fingerprint that was lifted from Heather's bed. It belonged to a young man named Brandon Bowling, whose fingerprints were on file due to his employment at a company where he previously worked. This development prompted Detective Massey to approach the interrogation very gently, wanting to give Brandon a chance to explain what happened that night. It seemed that Brandon understood he was caught, but he continued to deny any involvement in Heather's death. After questioning, detectives requested a DNA test from Brandon, suggesting that if he was innocent, the test would prove it. Brandon did as he was asked, perhaps hoping to be released from police custody, but that did not happen. The investigators decided not to wait for the test results. The match of the fingerprint provided substantial grounds for the next step. The police immediately sent a request to the court for permission to access Brandon's phone, which could help the investigation confirm his movements, track calls, and texts on the night of the crime. However, they were unprepared for what they found on his phone after the court approval. The video from Brandon Bowling's phone was one of the most shocking even to the most experienced detectives. In this video, the room of the core Heather was captured. Brandon recorded everything from intimate acts to beatings. Heather was still alive at the time of the recording. In February 2018, Brandon Richmond Bowling pleaded guilty to the attack on Heather Maples. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. On the day of the verdict, Heather's mother, Jennifer, made a speech that surprised many. When the trial ended in the corridor, Jennifer approached Bowling's mother. Jennifer simply hugged this woman, saying that they both lost their children that day. Unfortunately, Brandon Bowling never explained his motives. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think Brandon's motive was, if there was one? In 1965, 17-year-old Olen Emerton lived in Tifton, Indiana, with her parents and 3 younger brothers. A bright and ambitious student at Tifton High School, she aspired to attend Ball State University to become a teacher, a goal that would have made her the first in her family to attend college. On Saturday, October 16, 1965, Olen had a date with her classmate, Phil Rudebush. She picked him up in her vibrant red 1957 Chevrolet, and they headed to the Diana Theater to watch a horror movie starring Vincent Price. Afterward, they stopped by 6 Acres, a popular drive-in restaurant for local teenagers. After cruising the parking lot, they decided to leave. On their way, Olen and Phil spotted her 16-year-old brother, Floyd Wayne, walking down Jefferson Street. They picked him up and gave him a ride home. After dropping Floyd off, Olen still needed to take Phil back to his house. Though he lived only a short distance away, Olen insisted on driving him rather than making him walk. Olen dropped Phil off at approximately 11:30 p.m. and began the 6-block drive back to her own home. The following morning, her mother, Roxy, went into Olen's room to wake her for church but let out a scream upon discovering the bed had not been slept in. Olen had never made it home. Roxy had assumed she had returned because she had heard someone enter the house, but it turned out to be Floyd. Panicked, the family contacted the sheriff's office, and both law enforcement and the Emerton family began an urgent search for Olen. Olen's father found her car that morning parked on Green Street, roughly halfway between Phil's home and her own. No one in the neighborhood heard any loud noises outside the night before, and there was no evidence in or near the car that indicated a struggle had occurred. As best as investigators could surmise, Olen had willingly parked her car and left with someone. Olen's disappearance was front-page news in the local paper on Monday. Tipton was a safe community, and speculation amongst some students at Tipton High School focused more on the idea that Olen's sudden disappearance was the result of her eloping with an unknown man rather than on the possibility that something bad could have happened to her. Something terrible had happened to Olen, and it would forever change the small town of Tipton. Shortly after 2 p.m. on Monday, October 18th, an emergency call came into the Tipton County Dispatcher. The mother of a farmer had discovered an unresponsive woman lying on the grass between a small country lane and the fence surrounding one of her son's soybean fields just north of Tipton. She had made the discovery when she went to open the gate to the field for her son. She was too distraught to speak on the phone, so her son was the one who had to make the phone call for help. When police arrived on the scene, they realized that the young woman was deceased and that she was only in Emberton. She was found nude with her underwear draped across her head and the rest of her clothing folded neatly in a pile next to her head. Her glasses were found near her feet. Olen's autopsy created more questions in the case than it answered. The autopsy was performed by Dr. James McFadden, and Tipton's chief of police, James Pratt, was present during it. Dr. McFadden was unable to make any kind of determination about how Olen died. Her body was free of any marks besides insect bites, and extensive examination of her neck and throat showed no evidence of strangulation. Dr. McFadden told Chief Pratt that he couldn't find any reason why Olen was not alive, and explaining what had happened to them herself, and that her heart had seemingly just quit. Dr. McFadden therefore could not conclusively say that Olen had been murdered. His examination did not reveal injuries consistent with rape, but Olen may have had consensual sex shortly before her death. Since she was found nude, it is possible that she met up with someone else after dropping off Phil at his house and died of some sort of heart condition undetectable upon post-mortem examination during a romantic encounter with that unknown individual. This unknown player in the story then dumped her body along the road in an act which, while not homicidal, would still be callous and illegal. While authorities were unsure if Olen's death was a murder or an accident, there clearly was someone else with Olen at the time of her death, and only that person could provide answers in the confusing case. Olen's parents were of course devastated by the loss of their daughter. They were both extremely hard workers who had grown up in poverty, but eventually owned a nice house that they had built themselves and 2 small local businesses they created while Olen's father still worked full days at his factory job. In his grief, Olen's father Floyd had turned his discipline and dedication towards finding his daughter's killer. He accosted several of Olen's male classmates at her viewing, demanding to know if they were responsible for his daughter's death. Floyd Emerton was highly suspicious of one boy in particular, Tom Preston. Elaine had dated Tom, but he did not have a very good reputation in town. While he was handsome and charismatic, he was not a nice person and had a reputation for his smug demeanor and penchant for chasing after numerous girls. The police did question him about Olen's death, but did not consider him a strong suspect. Floyd Emerton, however, was not so quick to rule out Tom, and he made sure that the teenager knew it. He parked Olen's car outside of Tom's house every day for a month, and the principal of Tipton High School was so concerned about what Floyd might do to Tom that he locked all the doors to the school while he was in session. Tom was also driven to and from school by a sheriff's deputy for a time, and he slept 2 nights in the county jail because he felt safer there. Tom's behavior became more and more self-destructive throughout the rest of his senior year of high school, and he developed a drinking problem. Less than 2 weeks after he graduated high school in 1966, he was driving with a friend along State Road 28, east of Tipton, when his car skidded out of control and went off the road, wrapping around a tree. Tom's neck was broken, killing him instantly. In the years since Olen's death, suspicion has also fallen on another one of her classmates, Perry Stephen Miller. Miller was ahead of Olen in school, graduating with the class of 1965. Olen's mother, Roxy, found a school picture of Miller taken during his junior year of high school, with a note written to Olen on the back of it in her daughter's room following her death. 6 months after Olen's death, Miller committed what would be the first of many crimes against young women. While he was being interviewed following his arrest for assault and battery, following what was believed to be an attempted rape of an 18-year-old woman, he was asked about Olen's case and denied any involvement. Various legal delays meant that Miller still had not gone to trial for that charge in 1969, when he committed 2 abductions and rapes of teenagers, one 19 and one just 15, within a month of each other. The first of these attacks earned him a life sentence following his conviction. He only ended up serving 19 years. In November of 1990, he and 2 other men abducted, raped, and killed 19-year-old Crystal Helmchen. He was originally sentenced to death in that case, but his sentence was commuted to 130 years in prison as part of a plea deal in which he admitted his guilt in the crime. Given the fact that he knew Olen, was in Tipton at the time of her death, and went on to have such a troubling criminal career, reporters tried speaking with Miller about Olen's death while he was in prison. He refused such requests, but in 2017 he agreed to meet with Mike Terra, who had taken a job with the Tipton County Sheriff's Department after retiring as a detective for the Indiana State Police. During their meeting, Miller denied involvement in Olen's death or any other crime. Miller further claimed that he barely even knew Olen. When asked about the school picture he had given Olen and the note he had written to her on the back of it, Miller dismissed it as a typical high school pleasantry. Olen's parents, Floyd and Roxy, did seemingly everything possible to get answers about their daughter's death. They hired a Pinkerton detective, offered a $5,000 reward, and Roxy consulted psychics for decades. Despite their best efforts, both Floyd and Roxy never received answers about their daughter's death. Floyd died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound on July 4, 1981, while his wife was visiting family in Kentucky. Roxy passed away in 2011. Olen's death was a major event that completely changed the small community of Tipton and has haunted many of its residents. One of those former residents is Janice Thornton, who went to school with Olen. The memory of her classmate's death kept nagging at her over the years, and in the 1980s, the journalist began toying with the idea of writing a book about the case. Her parents were horrified by the idea, afraid that her investigation would put her in danger. Janice did eventually begin an extensive investigation many years later. The subsequent many years of work culminated in her 2018 book on the case, Too Good a Girl. Janice used the release of her book to help with the launch of the Olen Emerton Memorial Community Grant-Making Fund through the Tipton County Foundation. All donors who gave at least $100 received a copy of the book. Between donations and matching grants, the effort raised more than $40,000, well over the original fundraising goal of $25,000. While Olen's death has not been forgotten by her community, the questions that surround it still have not been answered. Nicholson, Georgia is a small town in Jackson County. Josh Adams was born and raised in the area where he was surrounded by family. He grew up fishing and exploring the outdoors on his family's large property. Josh was a natural athlete, excelling at any sport he tried. Despite his height and strong build, his sister has described Josh as a teddy bear, kind, sociable, and caring. Josh grew up having a close relationship with his family, which continued after he reached adulthood. Many members of his immediate and extended family made their homes on the family property, and Josh worked with his father and brother in their family business. While Josh loved his entire family, one member of it was especially important to him, his niece, Ava. Josh's sister Shannon was raising Ava on her own, and Josh played a major part in her life. Josh's life was not perfect, however. He struggled with substance abuse issues. By May of 2013, however, 25-year-old Josh seemed to be getting his life back on track. He had recently returned home after a 6-week-long drug rehabilitation program at a facility in Michigan. On May 20th, surveillance footage shows Josh at a local gas station and a bank where he cashed one of his parents' checks for $400 that same day. His car was found on property owned by members of his family on Brockton Loop. The car was parked in a pasture behind an out-of-use chicken house. This location was not far from a lake where Josh would occasionally go to fish. Josh's relative's neighbor did not recognize his white 2009 Chevrolet Malibu and notified the sheriff's office of what they thought might be a suspicious vehicle. After running the car's license plate and learning that it belonged to Josh, the sheriff's office was able to get in contact with members of his family who came to collect the car. The following day, unable to get a hold of Josh, his family made their own call to the sheriff's department to report him missing. Josh had left behind his wallet, car keys, identification, cell phone, and $25 in cash in his car. Curiously, his family also found his shoes a few 100 yards away from where the car had been parked closer to the lake. The property where Josh's vehicle had been parked was searched thoroughly. Dogs were brought in to help with the effort. Divers searched the lake, but because the water was so muddy, the lake was then drained and the lake bed was searched for evidence by the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. No sign of Josh was found. The Sheriff's Department was able to reach some of the last people Josh had spoken to on his cell phone. They called a man listed in Josh's phone as Tony, but the man provided a different name when he answered the call. He acknowledged that he had spoken with Josh on May 20th around 9 a.m., but refused to tell them what they had talked about. The next person investigators called denied speaking to Josh on 20th. When asked about the 5 phone calls, cell phone records showed him exchanging with Josh on that day, the man hung up the phone. Rumors have plagued this case since it began. One of the most long-standing ones involves Josh's body being put through a wood chipper, but the sheriff's department has not ever been able to find any evidence to support the rumor. They have received numerous tips in the case in the years following Josh's disappearance, but none of them have moved the case forward. While Josh's body has never been located, the sheriff's department is treating his case as a homicide, while Josh's family has accepted the very real possibility that he is no longer alive. The uncertainty his disappearance has left in their lives and their inability to lay him to rest have created unbearable stress that they will only be able to find some relief from when they finally get some answers about what happened to Josh. Josh's mother passed away after he went missing, and his sister believes she would still be alive were it not for her heart being broken over her son going missing. Josh's family is still offering a reward of up to $50,000 in the case. Cosby, Tennessee is a small, unincorporated community just north of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. 26-year-old Roger Hooper lived there in a double-wide mobile home just a few miles outside of the park with his wife Kim. He worked as a courier for a local antiques broker. On Friday, February 22, 1991, Cosby High School's basketball team had a home game against North Greene County High. Roger, a graduate of Cosby High, attended the game. He left the school around 10 p.m. with two of his younger cousins and one of their friends. Roger lived near several of his family members, and his cousins lived just 2 homes down from his. After dropping his cousins and their friend off, he made the short drive to his own home. One of the cousins he dropped off was then 13-year-old Shannon Hooper, who would later describe Roger as a big brother to him and the kind of person who would always inspire a good mood in everyone around him. Less than 2 minutes after Shannon got out of Roger's car, while he was inside his home, he and his family heard several shots. Upon hearing those shots while inside of her own home, Kim Hooper ran out to her back porch where she found her husband lying on his back. He had been shot several times in the upper half of his body. While new road construction has since improved transportation in the Cosby area, in 1991, it took first responders approximately half an hour to get there from the town of Newport. When Kim found Roger, he was still alive, but he died as a result of his injuries within a few moments. At the time of Roger's death, Kim was pregnant with the couple's first child, a son that Roger never got to meet. Roger's injuries indicated that his killer had shot down at him when he got to his back porch. This led investigators to believe that the killer had parked in a nearby cemetery, taken their shotgun into the wooded area that overlooked Roger's home, and waited there for him to return. The cemetery and the woods were up an embankment behind the home. Roger's murder was not his first experience with violence, and it would not be his family's last. Roger had been shot at just 2 months before his murder. On December 21, 1990, Donnie Webb had fired a pistol at Roger on the entrance ramp to Interstate 40 at Wilton Springs. He failed to actually shoot Roger, and the bullet instead struck the windshield of a truck that was exiting the interstate. The driver of the truck was injured when the broken glass from his windshield cut his forearm. When he pulled over, he was to locate the bullet that struck his vehicle and subsequently turned it over to the authorities. The day of the incident, Roger had Donnie Webb charged with reckless endangerment. He asked for the warrant to be dropped a few days later, but then went back to the authorities on February 8th to ask for the warrant to be reinstated after he got into an altercation with Webb at a high school basketball game. Roger was murdered 4 days prior to a preliminary hearing in the case. Authorities were obviously interested in talking with Webb after Roger was killed. They found him in West Virginia a few hours after the murder and instructed him to return to Tennessee. He did and was interviewed by Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agent Ross Haynes. During this interview, Webb admitted that he had fired his pistol at Roger back in December. He would later unsuccessfully try to suppress the statement in court, but was still convicted of reckless endangerment. He has never been charged in Roger's murder. Following Roger's murder, other members of his family were subjected to attacks. The home 2 doors down from Roger's, where his cousin Shannon's family lived, was fired upon during 2 different drive-by shootings. Luckily, no one was home during one of them, and while the entire family was present for the other, no one was killed. The Hooper family is sure that they know who killed Roger, and immediately after Roger's murder, they believed that the case would be resolved quickly. However, it has not. Investigators do have information they are withholding so as not to potentially jeopardize any future prosecutions, which they still believe could occur. In February of 2020, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation announced that there had been movement in Rogers' case in the past 3 to 4 months. They also have evidence that they can retest with technology not available in 1991. However, they do not believe that this evidence alone will result in a conviction. The TBI suggested to a local station that they cover the case because they do not believe that the case can be formally solved in court unless witnesses who have remained silent for almost 3 decades finally come forward. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.